Greetings to all. Welcome to CEC lecture. The topic of analysis is David Easton's systems theory. In this lecture, we shall attempt to discuss the meaning, the historical evolution of the systems approach within the big canvas of the study of comparative government and politics. This lecture shall discuss important characteristics, features, objectives of the systems theory. This lecture shall elaborate on the important aspects of the work of political scientist David Easton with reference to the political system theory, and as well as look at the critical aspect, the critical evaluation of David Easton's systems theory. To begin with, what do we understand by comparative government? Now, comparative government involves the study of features and legal powers of political institutions existing in various states. Another popular definition of the concept of comparative government holds that comparative government is the study of state and other political institutions in terms of their legal powers, functions, positions on a comparative basis. Comparative government, therefore, then, an example of it, when we study major constitutions of the world, wherein we will be looking at the features of political institutions in various states. Comparative politics is a broader term. To quote the definition by Jean Blondel, that is, comparative politics is the study of patterns of national governments in the contemporary world. Another important definition from M.G. Smith, that is, comparative politics is the study of the forms of political organizations, their properties, correlations, variations, modes of change. So, therefore, as we look at the definitions of both comparative government and comparative politics, the terms comparative politics and comparative governments are used interchangeably. However, there is a distinction between them. The scope of comparative politics is way much broader as compared to the scope of comparative governments. Now, when we delve into the subject of comparative political analysis, after this conceptual clarification of what do we mean by comparative government, what do we mean by comparative politics? When we look at the traditional approaches, namely the philosophical approach, the historical approach, institutional approach, legal approach, in the traditional approaches to comparative politics, political science, which was very much predominant in the subject of political science till the Second World War. However, looking at the historical, formalistic, legalistic, descriptive, explanatory aspect of the traditional approaches, they have been criticized. Traditional approaches have also been criticized that they were narrow in their sense, mostly because the focus was only description of phenomena. Further, empirical and scientific aspects were missing, and then mostly normatives, focusing on the values of politics. Now, seen in this perspective, the modern approaches then, with the focus towards conclusion coming from data, going beyond the mere study and description of political structures and the interdisciplinary study, the modern approaches become very popular in the subject of political science, as well as they had a bearing on the discipline, on the study of comparative political analysis. To quote an important perspective from Sidney Verba, that is how a certain kind of revolution was presented by the modern approaches to the study of comparative government and politics. Sidney Verba holds that these approaches made everyone look beyond description. One moves beyond description to more theoretically relevant questions, looking beyond just formal study, formal description of governments to political processes, the deeper meanings of political functions, and most important, looking beyond the countries of Western Europe to the history, the present struggles of Asia, Africa, Latin America. Almond and Powell pointed out that the modern approaches, they pointed towards certain important aspects. And what were they? Search for more comprehensive scope, search for realism, search for precision, search for the theoretical order. Now herein we have to understand that modern approaches to the study of comparative governments and politics, there are many modern approaches. Now systems approach, which is also called as a systems theory or the systems analysis, is an important modern approach. While we talk about modern approach from the economic approach, the psychological approach, the simulation approach, systems theory is one of the many important modern approaches. According to Professor Kaplan, it is the study of a set of interrelated variables as distinguished from the environment of tie set and tileways in which the set is maintained under the impact of environmental disturbances. Further, another important perspective on the systems theory as a modern approach can be read from the work of William A. Welch studying politics, and that is, it focuses on set of patterned relations involving frequent interactions and a subsequent degree of interdependence amongst the members of a system, as well as established procedure for prediction and maintenance of the system. Now, systems approach. How do we define systems approach? This approach, the systems approach, it is the study of interrelated variables forming one system, a unit, a whole, which is composed of many facts, a set of elements standing in interaction. An important assumption before we go ahead with studying the systems approach, that is, one must understand the assumption over which it is based, that is, system consists of discernible, regular, internally consistent patterns, each interacting with one another and giving on the whole the picture of a self-regulating order. What are the presumptions of the systems approach is the next important aspect that we will focus on. The important presumptions of the systems approach are existence of a whole on its own merit, the whole consisting of parts, the whole existing apart from other wholes, each whole influencing the other and in turn being influence itself. The parts of the whole are not only interrelated, but they interact with one another and in the process creating a self-evolving work. The parts relate themselves into a patterned relationship while the whole exists and keeps existing. Now, when we talk about systems approach, the historical aspect is very important to understand. The first discipline wherein the systems approach was used was the discipline of biology. The German biologist Ludwig van Bartholfly was the first to state the formulation of the general systems theory way back in 1930s. Then therefore, one also has to look at the work of some of the important social scientists, and herein one must look at the work of American social scientists who have pioneered the systems analysis in political science. David Easton's A Systems Analysis of Political Life, 1965. Comparative Politics, a Development Approach by Gabriel A. Almond and G. Bingham Powell Jr., wherein they propose a variety of cultural and functional ways to measure the development of societies. Another important work where David Easton's A Systems Analysis of Political Life, we have just seen. David Apter's work, Introduction to Political Analysis. Herein, one also must look into account the work of Karl Deutsch, that is the work Nation and the World Contemporary Political Science, or Karl Deutsch's book The Nerves of Government, wherein a close analogy between communications engineering and that of power engineering is presented. It also applies the communication theory and cybernetics to the study of international politics. According to Karl Deutsch, information then, it is a pattern distribution or a pattern relationship between events. Morton Kaplan, System and Process in International Politics, wherein the work presents a very fine employment of systems, game, cybernetic concepts in its theoretical formulation. Another important work, Power and Society, a Framework for Political Inquiry by Harold D. Laswell and Abraham Kaplan, wherein power, as per this work, it is one of the values which is manifested in interpersonal relations, wherein power then cannot be understood in abstraction, in isolation from other values. David Easton, as we talk about the systems theory, David Easton was an American political scientist, and we all know his important work, The Political System. Now, this work is very important for the understanding the behavioral revolution also. This work attempts to unify the empirical theory of political science to replace the traditional study of politics. David Easton was one of the leading proponents of the applications of systems theory to the study of politics. Easton's major work, as we all know, The Political System, an inquiry into the state of political science. Let us understand the work now. This work pointed out that political science, wherein one has to look at the important arguments, ideas that have been put forward by David Easton. That is, political science, which David Easton argued, had become dominated by a combination of constitutional legalism and history of ideas. Once again, we like to draw your attention towards how we discuss the traditional approaches, and the dissatisfaction with the traditional approaches was an important cause for the use of modern approaches in the subject. And the argument further that is put forward that is for political science to become scientifically mature, to be as exact and precise as like natural sciences, it is needed to internalize scientific principles, the methodology, and focus on the empirical, observable behavior of political actors. David Easton's work selects political system as basic unit of analysis. It concentrates on the intra-system behavior of various systems. This work defines political systems as, that is, those interactions through which values are authoritatively allocated and implemented for a society. Now, what are the characteristic features of Easton's concept of political system? Let's understand that. Political system implies a set of interactions through which values are authoritatively allocated. Now, this presents an important definition with respect to power dynamics also, that power is authoritative allocation of values. This means that decisions of those who are in power therefore are binding. Further, political system is a system of regularized, persistent patterns of relationship amongst the people and institutions within it. So, therefore, the idea that the consistency aspect of patterns of working of political system is very important to understand. Further, political system, like any natural system, has in it a self-regulating system by which it is able to change, correct and adjust its processes and structures. So, therefore, the behavioral perspective, wherein the idea of unity of sciences, social sciences as exact as natural sciences, this is an important perspective that the political system presents. For the political system is dynamic, in the sense it can maintain itself through the feedback mechanism. So, then what is the utility of feedback mechanism? The feedback mechanism helps the system to persist through everything else associated. It may change even radically. Political systems, it is very important to understand, as Easton's work points out, it is different from other systems or environments, physical, biological, social, economic, ecological, but it is incoverable to their influence. Further, inputs are through demands and support, and then these inputs, they put the political system at work. What are the outputs then? That is, while outputs are through policies and decisions, throw back what is not accepted through the feedback. So Easton defined politics and the most important aspect of power within it, that is from the framework of authoritative allocation of values. It is important to ask here, why is the allocation authoritative? Because it enjoys support from the environment. Further, allocation is done based on demands put forward. Its ends are connected with the social process. The system is open, output flows back into the environment through feedback, giving rise to fresh demands. So therefore, it is important to understand here that political system, it receives inputs, and once again, what are these inputs? Demands and support. Amongst the competing demands, the demands which enjoy more support, they shape the decisions and the policies. Further, one also has to look at the plurality of the system, that is, various organizations such as pressure groups, interest groups, political parties, individuals, politicians, administrators, opinion leaders, they place demands. Further, the very idea of how the important aspect of the support matters, that is, demands which enjoy the most support, they shape the output policies and decisions. Further, why this aspect is important? Because this process also prevents the system from getting overloaded and breaking down. Now, demands are subclassified into 4 types. What are they? Demand for allocation of goods and services, demand for regulation of behavior, demands for participation in the political system, demands for communication and information. Outputs also are subclassified into, that is, extraction, example, revenue for the state, regulation of behavior, that is, to benefit the people and order, allocation of goods and services, and symbolic outputs such as affirmation, communication, display of values, amongst others. Now, as we understand the systems approach, let us understand what is the feedback. Feedback, as we all know, feedback mechanism makes the system responsive. It keeps the process in a perpetual continuity and motion. What are the advantages of the feedback mechanisms? Because it helps the political process to attain goals of the community. Further, feedback guides the direction of the policy in such a manner that it reflects the will of the community. Now, political system has 3 important characteristics. What are they? Comprehensiveness, interdependence, and existence of boundaries. Further, what are the features of a political system? Openness, adaptiveness, comprehensiveness, self-regulating, ongoing. Now, once again, as we have looked through David Easton's work, David Easton defines political system as a set of interactions as abstracted from the totality of social behavior through which values are authoritatively allocated for society. Further, it is important to point out that all political systems are connected with other social systems. Now, with this explanation of David Easton's systems theory, we now go towards the next important aspect, that is the critical evaluation. Now, when we look at the important revisions and research that have been done on David Easton's systems theory, some important points have been made through critically analysis. Now, one of the important points has been that it is just a mere compilation or simplification of concepts. Another important critical aspect of analyzing David Easton's systems theory is that it is based on Western liberal democratic functioning. So, therefore, the entire issue of Eurocentrism in comparative political analysis, and therefore, the need to go beyond Eurocentrism. So, therefore, it is argued that David Easton's systems theory does not provide a useful model to understand the developing society systems. Further, it is often argued when we look at the Marxian perspective that this system, with the focus toward inputs, the focus towards working on the inputs and the output and the feedback mechanism, it ignores the class division aspects. It ignores that how one of the important divisions that concerns the political process is the issue of the society being divided into haves versus haves not. And as a consequence of that, the policies, they reflect the interests of the rich class. So, what one finds here is comparative politics as a subdiscipline of the subject of political science has indeed come a long way. The scope of comparative politics is very much broader than that of comparative governments, and for a true and fair understanding of the process of politics, the scope of comparative political analysis also witness the leap from the focus towards traditional approaches, the historical, philosophical, legalistic aspects, towards the use of modern approaches, wherein the use of interdisciplinary study, use of data to draw conclusion was very important. David Easton's work on systems theory has to be seen in that aspect. It's an important contribution in the behavioral perspective. It's an important contribution to understand the feedback mechanisms and to look at the process of political science in a definite format of looking at as authoritative allocation of values, with the inputs in the form of demands and support, output in the form of policies and decisions, the feedback mechanism playing a very important role to keep and sustain the system. David Easton's systems theory, therefore, presents to us some very important aspects of decision making, of the working of political process, of interdependence in society and the policy making apparatus. But however, with too much simplification of concepts, the focus towards Western perspective, somewhere not being applicable to many issues in the developing societies, ignoring the class, cultural, societal division aspects are some of the important criticisms too that we must look into account while understanding David Easton's systems theory. Dear learners, we hope that the lecture presented to you significant inputs and insights. We look forward to positive, encouraging feedback from you all for the lecture. Thank you very much.